Swymbridge, one of the largest parishes in North Devon, is 4.5 miles east-southeast of Barnstable, containing 7,280 acres of fine agricultural land. The population in 1801 was 1,082, rising to 1,736 by 1851, dropping to 1,106 by 1901, and dropping again to 1,027 by 1951. The name comes from Swymbridge. Sawin was one of the clergy of South Molton who founded a chapelry at Swimbridge in the days of the Saxon King Edward the Confessor, 1041 to 66. Sawin held lands here which were given to him by Queen Matilda. The parish was, until comparatively modern times, linked to Lanky and Newport as part of the manor of Bishop Staunton. The parish church of St. James consists of a nave with north and south aisle, north transept, vestry, south porch and western tower with lead spire. The interior length of the church is 71 feet 3 inches and the width 44 feet. The tower, which is the only remaining part of the previous church, is dated 1310. In 1897, the spire was recased and re-leaded as a permanent memorial to Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee. In 1928, the bells were retuned, rehung, and fitted with new ropes. The old clappers were placed on an oak frame at the expense of the Reverend J.M. Parry and can be seen at the back of the church. The treble bell was cast by John Taylor & Co. in 1882. The second bell, seen in this picture, bears the inscription, "Glory to God in the highest, 1752. On the third are the words, "Prosperity to our benefactors, W.E. 1753. On the fourth, Peace and Good Neighbourhood, W.E. 1753. On the fifth, William Evans of Cheapstow cast us all, 1753, and on the tenor bell, Mr. John Lay, Churchwarden, W.E. 1753. John, Henry, Edwin and Francis Gaydon gave the clock in the tower in 1881. The font is of lead, cased in plain oak, above which are elaborately carved doors forming a cupboard. These are surmounted with a canopy, giving it somewhat the appearance of a pulpit. The doors are carved in very refined Italian Renaissance designs. At the restoration of 1880, the font was removed from an exactly similar position on the north side of the church. The stone pulpit is of early Tudor date, about 1490. Traces of the old colouring and gilding can still be seen. The 5 figures on the pulpit represent St. Paul holding a sword, St. Peter holding a key, which unfortunately has lost its top, St. Augustine, St. Ambrose and St. Jerome. Originally they were identified by their names painted on the scrolls which they carry. The pulpit stands on a slender stem, the base of which is cleverly brought out to a square at floor level. The rood screen is the outstanding feature of the church. It stretches across the full width of nave and aisles and is 10 foot 3 inches high. It is believed that before the restoration in 1880, when the screen was much restored, only one of the two openings in the upper portion of the screen was there. That is the opening on the north side, this being the obvious site of the altar of St. Catherine. The other was added for the sake of uniformity. Its chief characteristic is the remarkable amount of carving on the western side. The figures on the rood beam above the screen of Christ upon the cross, the Blessed Virgin Mary and St. John were dedicated on July the 25th, 1956. The altar rails are of Restoration period. The ones they replaced bore the date 1701. They have disappeared since the Restoration, as has also the curious old lock 2 feet long on the church door. The alabaster and marble reredos was erected in the church in 1894. The central figures are Our Lord on the Cross, St. John and the Three Marys. The side figures are St. James, patron saint of St. Swymbridge Parish Church, and St. Thomas, patron saint of Travellers' Rest Church, with adoring angels each side. The reredos is in memory of John Smythe, who died in 1891. The processional cross, which stands in the chancel, was given by Mrs. Kirgenvin in memory of her husband, the Reverend Cecil Arthur Kirgenvin, a former vicar of Swimbridge. The stained glass window of the Last Supper, above the reredos, was erected in memory of John Smythe, who died in 1861, and of Mary, his wife, who died in 1880. The carved oak alms dish and bookrest were made from old oak, which came from the church before the Restoration in 1880. The original Dennington Chapel was removed in 1880. The panel of ceiling above this chapel was restored to its original beauty in June 1909. This work was done by Messrs. Dart and Son Barnstable. The restored Dennington or Lady Chapel was dedicated on February the 1st, 1955. The sanctuary lamp and credence table were given by Mrs. Kirgenvin, Mrs. Tisdall and Mrs. Buchan in memory of their sisters, the Mrs. Georgie and Ethel Whale. The blue frontal used on the new altar was made many years before by Mrs. Kirgenvin, Miss George Whale and Mrs. Morgan. The oak alms dish was given by the PCC in August 1955 in memory of Mr. F.S. Harris. The window depicting Our Lord's Ascension was put in memory of the Reverend John Russell in May 1885. At the same time, the glass from the old east window was placed in the west window of the north aisle. This coloured window was removed yet again, together with the frosted glass windows in the church, and replaced with clear glass in 1960. The window on the south side of the Dennington Chapel, which depicts the Nativity and the Good Shepherd, was dedicated in 1948 by the Reverend H.J.A. Rushbridger. St. Bridget's Chapel is believed to have been built by Sir John Mules of Irishborough. The roof is flat. One of the many bosses on the roof depicts St. Dunstan holding the devil's nose with a pair of pincers. The chapel is now utilised as an organ chamber and choir vestry. The organ was given to the church in 1881 by John Smythe, Esquire. It was built by Vowles of Bristol, and the pipes were coloured by Lady Susan Fortescue. The oak litany desk is in memory of Ernest George Simmons, who was killed in action on November the 2nd, 1915. The two oak flower holders were put in the openings in the screen in October 1932 by Mrs. Shelley, in memory of her husband, Mr. William Shelley, headmaster at Swymbridge School for 33 years. The tower screen, designed by Mr. Herbert Reed of Exeter, was given to the parish church by the Reverend J.M. Parry in December 1928. The top half only is in memory of Capel W. Hogg and was given by his parents in 1948. The gallery at the west end of the church, which was dated 1617, was removed in 1880. The 18 carved figures of angels on the roof of the centre aisle of the nave were given by the Reverend J.M. Parry in 1930. In November 1947, a 17th century chair was purchased in memory of a former church warden, Mr. F. W. Newton. The oak chest is in memory of Adrian Stephen, infant son of J.N. Pike Knott of Bydown. Lightning struck the church spire on 26th of December 1960. The weathercock, parts of which are shown here, was severely damaged, and a new one was put on the spire in 1961. The parish registers commenced baptisms and burials in 1562 and marriages in 1563. Amongst the church plate is a very fine chalice of Elizabethan style dated 1576, the work of T. Matthew, goldsmith of Exeter. A notice board in the room above the vicar's vestry gives the names of some of the benefactors of Swymbridge Parish. In 1890, the parish lands consisted of 116 acres and 18 houses, let for about £200 a year. This amount was divided into 3 parts, 1 part for church repairs, 1 part for the school, and 1 part for the poor. The Fairfies sold all their remaining property on the 2nd of June 1962. This part of the churchyard was added in 1877, the land being given by the Duke of Bedford. An old picture shows houses on this land. John Russell was born at Dartmouth on December the 21st, 1795. He took his degree at Oxford, was ordained deacon in 1819 and priest the following year. He was curate of George Nympton and South Molton. At the beginning of 1826, he married Miss Penelope Bury, daughter of Admiral Bury of Dennington. He moved to Swymbridge in 1832. The following year, he was appointed perpetual curate of Lanky and Swymbridge. He remained at Swymbridge for 48 years. Despite his fame in the hunting field, it is said of him that he entered on the work of the ministry with a due sense of the sacred office and of his own responsibilities. It is also said of him that he was always ready to visit the sick, relieve the wants of his poorer brethren, and to plead in many neighbouring pulpits the cause of hospitals and institutions. He always befriended and protected the gypsies, and when the king of the gypsies, Edward Boswell, fell ill and felt that he was going to die, requested that a charm he had worn and prized greatly, a Spanish silver coin, should be given to the Reverend John Russell in token of the sympathy he had shown to him and his tribe. At the same time, he requested that he should be buried in Swymbridge churchyard by the Reverend John Russell himself. The change to Black Torrington Rectory he never ceased to regret. After 3 short years in his new home, he was brought back to Swymbridge to be laid to rest beside his wife, who had died on New Year's Day, 1875. The Reverend John Russell was buried on Ascension Day, 1883, aged 87 years. The Swymbridge Baptist Chapel, which was opened in 1837, was built largely at the expense of Mr. George Lovering. Mr. Lovering, who became pastor, was born at Chapeltown in 1799 and died at the age of 66 on February the 3rd, 1866. The Methodist Chapel was built in 1898 on a portion of the field known as Cross Park. The land was given by the 11th Duke of Bedford. The architect was Mr. A. Lauder. The stone was given by Mr. John Pengelly and was hauled voluntarily from Biden Quarry by Mr. Jeremiah Dunn, Mr. William Mortimer, Mr. John Tucker, and Mr. W.R. Shapland. This is the inside of the Methodist Chapel. Swymbridge had its first Wesleyan chapel in 1816. This building, in what is known as Chapel Court, is now a private house. It was the oldest chapel in the circuit. Gun Chapel of Ease, or the Church of the Holy Name at Gun, together with a stable, was built on part of a field known as Gun Field, numbered 173 on the tithe apportionment map of the parish, by public subscription at a cost of £550. It was opened for divine service by Dr. Temple, then Bishop of the diocese, on the 7th of August, 1873. The carved altar table in memory of Mrs. Clay was dedicated on the 25th of September 1935. The oak screen between the annex and the church is in memory of James Laramie Bartlett of Tree Beach, who died in 1935, and the bell was hung in 1946 in memory of Major Clay, for many years a lay reader in this parish. The stained glass window at the east end of Gun Church, in memory of Mr. W.N. Griffin, was unveiled on August the 13th, 1924. Subjects depicted in the window are faith, hope, and love. The ground on which Gun Baptist Chapel was built was given by Mr. Albert Vickery of Witsford, West Buckland. The foundation stones were laid in February 1909, and the cost of the building was £150. In niches of two of the stones, copies of the North Devon Journal and the Baptist Times were placed. For almost 20 years before the chapel was built, Baptist mission services were held in the Gun and Stone Cross area, in cottages, farmhouses, and in the open. On April the 7th, 1909, Mr. E. J. Soares, Liberal MP for North Devon, opened the chapel. The Church of St. Thomas, Travellers' Rest, was erected in 1866-7 at a cost of approximately £850. It consisted of nave and chancel with a small spire containing one bell. This spire was removed in 1955. In September 1932, the entrance to the church from the lane was made by Mr. J. Westcott and his brother. It consists of an iron gate with steps and a rail and 4 pillars of brick faced with cement. The reed organ with ornamental pipes was placed in the church in August 1927. It was the gift of Mr. and Mrs. J. B. Hull. The fine carved figures on the rood beam were put there in January 1930 at the expense of the Reverend J. M. Parish. The memorial to Bessie Thorne and Alice Offer on the west wall behind the font was unveiled on Sunday the 10th of December 1933. Cobberton Methodist Chapel was built in 1838 at a cost of £120. It can seat 150 persons. Swymbridge Newland Mission Room was opened on the 26th of November 1887. Services were held there regularly until 1895, after which date no further mention of it is made in the church magazine. And this building was also the Hare and Hounds Inn. Swymbridge School was built in 1866 for the education of children and adults, or children only, of the labouring, manufacturing and other poorer classes of the parish. The schoolhouse was added in 1889. Fire caused £250 worth of damage to the school in June 1946. Cobberton School was built in 1876 at an outlay of £300. The average attendance in 1890 was 30 pupils. The school closed in 1921. The old schoolroom is a building adjoining the churchyard, which is regarded as the property of and maintained by the church wardens for the time being. The upper portion of it was formerly used for a school. The building is said to have at one time been occupied by poor persons, but not within living memory. There are references in the old church warden's book of accounts to expenditure made on the building. Two cottages stood on the square until just after the Second World War, when they were demolished. A blacksmith shop was also on the square along beside the stream. This was demolished before the First World War. All this property belonged to the Fiefees. The Jubilee Hall was built by C.W. Rice of West Buckland at a cost of approximately £1,000. The foundation stone was laid by Mrs. Barclay Black on June 18, 1938. The hall was opened by Captain D.M. Wills, the area representative of the National Council of Social Services, on November the 19th, 1938. Mr. F.W. Drew, the local schoolmaster, was secretary of the management committee from the start of the project in 1935. Mr. P.M. Williams was chairman. The shelter was erected in 1952 by the descendants of the Yule family of Bydown, Dennington, Yoland and Yocott. The War Memorial was erected at a cost of approximately £30. The unveiling and dedication ceremony took place on September the 26th, 1920, in memory of the men from this parish who fell in the 1914 to 1918 war. A tablet commemorating those who fell during the 1939 to 1945 war now stands at the side. Six inns were trading in Swymbridge Parish in 1866. The Coach and Horses, the Lamb and Flag, the Hare and Hounds, the Stone Cross Inn, the Traveller's Rest and the New Inn. Only two remain, the Coach and Horses and the New Inn. Fire destroyed the thatched roof of the Coach and Horses on March the 9th, 1953. The name of the New Inn was changed to the Jack Russell in June 1962. The licensing committee declined to renew the licence of the Lamb and Flag in High Street in May 1909, as there were two other licensed houses in the village, both on the main road. The Traveller's Rest at Cobberton, shown here, the Hare and Hounds at Swymbridge Newland, and the Stone Cross Inn have also ceased trading in the parish. No record of the date when these inns closed can be found in the records of the licensing justices, which go back to 1887. This view of Barnstable Hill was taken from the bridge before the road was widened outside the school at the beginning of 1964. Church Lane consists of 4 cottages built of stone and cob. On the corner where the main road joins Church Lane stands the stone-built blacksmith shop. All properties in Church Lane at one time belonged to the Fairfies, but are now privately owned. The last blacksmith left the village in 1954. The Fairfies then sold the forge, which ceased to be business premises. High Street at one time contained an inn, a bakery, a dame's school and 2 shops. The house directly opposite the top of Church Lane was a dame's school. The next house up was the Lamb and Flag Inn, which ceased trade in May 1909. The old Wesleyan chapel stood in the court behind the Coach and Horses. There was one shop on the corner of High Street and Church Lane, and another above the Lamb and Flag. It is believed that the bakery was situated in the same premises as the other shop. Numbers 1, 2, 3 and 5 church cottages are built of stone and cob with slated roof and formed part of the Fairfie property sold in June 1962. Number 4 church cottages, which adjoins number 5, was owned by the church until about 1960 and at one time was inhabited by the sexton rent-free. The land attached to Mill Court once formed part of Smaldon Farm, and the house was a workman's cottage. The half-shot water wheel was used to work the threshing machine as well as the millstones. The stream, which apparently has no name, once supplied the power for Riverton Mills, Mill Court and the tannery on its journey through Swimbridge Parish. The 2 mills have ceased to function and the tannery is now powered by mains electricity. This lane, which comes out behind the Jack Russell Inn, leads to the tannery and on to Hannaford. These cottages were last occupied in 1963 and demolished in the first half of 1964. The 4 council houses at High Cross, Swymbridge were built in 1933 at a completion cost of £1,531, 1 shilling and no pence. The 5 bungalows in the field behind the Methodist chapel were built between the years 1953 and 1962. The vicarage was built in 1887. Station Hill, before the arrival of the railways, was known as Taylor's Row. 3 more houses than are left standing now can be seen in an old picture of the village. The 12 houses at Archer Park, 3 blocks of 4, were built in 1951 at a completion cost of £19,763, 13 shillings and 10 pence. The 2 pairs of semi-detached bungalows at Archer Park were completed in 1963 at an estimated cost of £8,400. The railway line through Swymbridge was opened for traffic on the 1st of November 1873. The formal celebrations of the opening took place at South Molton on November the 6th, 1873. It was then known as the Devon and Somerset Railway Line. The old water tap, which stands by the Methodist chapel, has the date 1870 engraved on a stone above it, and a large letter B on a stone behind it. The water was given to the village by the Duke of Bedford, and it came from Indiewell. Mains water was brought to Swymbridge in 1950 to 51, and then the old supply from Indiewell was cut off. At Welcome Farm, the earthworks and site of a hamlet believed to be Saxon are plainly visible. This old barn in the field is probably on the site of one of the buildings. Yarnicott consists of 6 farms. This picture shows 2 of the farms of Lower Yarnicott and the road leading to Gun, Tordown and Stone Cross. This old house at Higher Yarnicott is stated to have been used as a vicarage for a short time before the present vicarage was built in 1887. Tordown House was the home of the Reverend John Russell from 1833 until the death of Mrs. Bury, his mother-in-law, when he moved to Dennington House. He returned to Tordown for a few years before he left Swymbridge for Black Torrington in 1880. This photograph shows the farms of Coombe and Broomscott. Unfortunately, there is very little information available about them. The picturesque hamlet of Gun lies 3 miles north of Swymbridge village and contains its own Anglican church and Baptist chapel. Stone Cross lies 3 miles northeast of Swymbridge village. The Stone Cross Inn was still a licensed house in 1866. Yowland was at one time the home of Tom Figgis, from where on occasions he is reputed to have made daring escapes. On one occasion the house was surrounded. Tom put his hat on a long pole and pushed it up the chimney of the old fireplace. The top of the hat was just allowed to show above the chimney, whereupon the attackers immediately fired. Whilst they were busy reloading their muzzle-loading guns, a somewhat slow and laborious performance, Tom dashed out and away over the hills at the back. The property was confiscated by the Crown when Tom Figgis was arrested. The old government coat of arms in heavy cast metal, which was placed on the house when it was confiscated, lay in the old fireplace for many years. It is said that it was still there at the beginning of the Second World War. The little house at the side of this picture, not the big house, contains the chimney used by Tom Figgis. Riverton Mills, now in ruins, was used for milling flour. It was powered by an overshot water wheel. Owing to the fact that the mill was overgrown, the photograph reveals very little of the actual building. Two of the stones used for milling the flour can be seen among the debris in this picture. This is another photograph of what remains of the mill. Although the mill has been crumbling since the Second World War, the wheel remained intact until 1963, when it was partly destroyed by vandals. Smoulton Farm, also known as Pitt, was owned by the Duke of Bedford until 1898, when a great deal of Duke of Bedford's property in this parish was sold. Indiwell Farmhouse, in the background, was destroyed by fire in February 1913. The farmhouse was completely gutted, only portions of the walls being left standing. It was supposed the fire was started by a stray spark which ignited the thatch. The following inscription appears on a stone at Kerscott. This well was rebuilt by the inhabitants of this village, done by Peter Milden, 1756. The well is in the field in front of the house at West Kerscott. One of these two cottages at Kerscott contains some fine plasterwork. This is a portion of the plaster ceiling in one of the ground floor rooms. Bydown House is a large and imposing mansion in the classic style, with a very fine pillared and domed entrance hall. It was formerly owned by the Main and Chichester families. Bydown cottages were built in 1914. Dennington House was the home of Admiral Bury, whose daughter Penelope married the Reverend John Russell in 1826. John Russell himself lived at Dennington House for a time. The family of Dennington, who took their name from the estate, first appear in 1285. Ernsborough, now Irishborough, was the ancestral freehold estate, first recorded in 1175. There are considerable traces of antiquity in the present house. Irishborough Manor House, of which only a tower remained in 1773, was the birthplace in 1554 of John Carroll, LLD, Master of Trinity Hall, Cambridge, and author of The Interpreter, a well-known dictionary of law terms. Stowford is the traditional birthplace of St. Urith, who was martyred at Chittlehampton in the 8th century. The present house is in part medieval. Cobberton House, or West Cobberton, was once the seat of the Burys. Afterwards came to the Notts. Mary Nott, by her marriage with William Thorne, brought it into the latter family, and it still belongs to the representatives of the late William Thorne. The two pairs of semi-detached council houses were erected at Cobberton in 1932 at a completion cost of £1,584, 4 shillings and 10pence. Herson, originally called Haldmerston, was once a sub-manor of the great episcopal manor of Taunton, or Bishop's Taunton. Hannaford House contains some very fine plaster ceilings, believed to have been worked sometime between 1620 and 1650. Hannaford used to belong to the Duke of Bedford, whose family crest can be seen on a fireplace in the house. Copper was at one time mined at Hannaford. The pond at Marsh is a disused lime pit. Some old lime kilns can still be seen on the farm. Leather has been made at Swymbridge from very early times. There is record of a tanner called Yule being buried in the parish churchyard as long ago as 1580. But beyond the fact that some of the buildings still in use were built about 1800, little is known of the early history of the tannery. It is certain, however, that even until the First World War, operations were divided between tanning and agriculture. Stocks of leather were probably built up during the slack season on the land. The present company was formed in 1921 for the production of sole leather. It is a modern mixed tannage, and although neither bark nor other raw materials have been used for many years, signs of them are still to be found, and parts of the old bark mill survive. Until 1937, when the electricity supply grid reached the village, power was supplied by steam, and electricity for illumination was generated by power from a water wheel. Stone from Wooder or Hooder Quarry for use on roads was sold at 1 10pence per yard in 1907, according to an old newspaper report. Another newspaper states that the first tarring experiment on the main roads in the Barnstable district was made at Swymbridge in June 1909. Stone from Bidown Quarry was used for building purposes. Bestridge Pond, hidden from view in this picture by trees and bushes, was once a lime pit. Old kilns can still be seen at Bestridge Yard. Lime was also worked at Irishborough and Tower for many years by a family called Berry, who resided at Swymbridge from 1570 to 1855. The main road through the parish from South Molton to Barnstable, before the present road was built, ran along Tower Lane, through Kerscott and Devil's Lane, down Hannaford Hill to Hunnicut Bridge. This picture shows Tower Lane and Filly Garage, which is just inside the parish boundary. This photograph shows Devil's Lane from the Dennington Hill end looking towards Kerscott. This lane, known as Steep, leads from Bydown Road to the main South Malton to Barnstable Road. It formed part of the roadway to Swymbridge village by way of Smolden Farm and Pit Lane to Mill Court. The continuation of this lane down towards Smolden Farm can still be clearly seen. And this view of Swymbridge village, taken from Bestridge Gateway, concludes the set of 100 slides of the parish. There are many gaps in this account which I hope will one day be filled. I'm very grateful to all the people, both in and out of the parish of Swymbridge, who have lent me books and papers, given me information and allowed me to take photographs.